Baghdad did not wake up one morning and decide to be smart. It decided to be organized. That is uglier, and it works better. The city built a machine for ideas the way shipyards build hulls. People call it the House of Wisdom, which sounds like a temple with incense and whispers. It was closer to a workshop with ink stains and deadlines. Start with the river. You do not build a brain in a desert. You build it where boats bring books. The Tigris carried paper, parchment, scholars, scribes, and problems. Baghdad arranged them like tools on a wall. If a man knew Greek, he sat next to a man who knew Arabic. If someone understood medicine, he sat next to someone who understood numbers. The rule was simple. Every skill should have a neighbor. The job was translation, not poetry. Procedures. You take a book in one language and you make the same book in another language. If you do it badly, medicine kills, stars lie, and bridges fall. So they treated translation like surgery, teams, steps, checks, and revisions. A translator did not just know words. He knew the subject. If he was translating an astronomy table, he had to be able to use it at night without embarrassing himself in front of the sky. Here is how a day might go. A bundle of books arrives from Syria, Egypt, or somewhere that grew libraries the way orchards grow fruit. A clerk logs each title so it does not vanish into a nobleman's robe by accident. A senior scholar picks which team takes which book. A copyist writes a clean base text so the team is not squinting at a smear. Then the translators work line by line, one reading the source and speaking it in a third language everyone in the room understands, the second shaping it into Arabic that makes sense to someone who uses the book to do something real. A critic sits with a wax tablet and interrupts whenever he smells nonsense. That smell is strong when you translate blindly. Money helped. It always does. The court paid for books like other courts paid for jewels. Translators were rewarded by weight. A finished book might be paid for with its weight in gold. People call that a legend. Fine. Legends usually grow from habits that were true enough to make someone jealous. The point is this: you did not become poor by learning Greek verbs in Baghdad. The House of Wisdom did not have a monopoly on brains. It had a monopoly on process. You want Aristotle? Great. You do not just translate him. You translate commentary that explains him. And then you teach that commentary to apprentices so the next book does not explode in their hands. You want medicine? Do not recite Galen like scripture. Check his claims against bodies and fix the bits that fail. It is not sacrilege. It is maintenance. Paper mattered. Without it, all this would be talk. Parchment is slow and expensive. Paper is a miracle that does not brag. You beat rag pulp into a slurry, lift it with a screen, press and dry it into sheets, and suddenly you can afford to copy like a man who believes in tomorrow. Baghdad learned the trick from the East, turned it into an industry, and fed the scribes. A city that feeds scribes gets smart by accident. This is the part where people ask if it was tolerant. That is a word that has been sanded smooth by marketing. Baghdad was practical. If you could help the machine, you ate. Christian scholars came with Greek in their bones. Jewish scholars came with arithmetic that did not stutter. Persian scholars brought astronomy with long memories. Indian scholars brought numerals that made counting less stupid. The city did not hug them. It hired them. Let us talk about numbers without making anyone's eyes roll. Roman numerals are stubborn rocks. You can count with them, but you cannot dance. Indian numerals are nimble, and the zero is the secret shoe. Zero is a place to stand when the column has nothing in it. It is a promise that nothing matters, literally, and that makes everything faster. Try adding with letters, and then try adding with digits, and a zero that holds empty spots, like a good friend, holds your place in line. Baghdad liked speed. Zero delivered. Astronomy turned from stories into tools. You build tables of where the planets and the moon will be on nights, future you cannot yet see. That demands long observation and good math. Baghdad funded observatories where men climbed stairs with cold hands and wrote numbers by lamplight for people they would never meet. Those numbers drove calendars, prayer times, navigation, and the smug smiles of anyone who loves predicting things in front of people who do not. Medicine turned from charms into charts, not always cleanly. People still argued about humours the way barbers argue about football, but the trend bent toward tests, case notes, and craft. You do not cure by charisma. You cure by pattern recognition and remembering what worked last time, instead of reinventing the fever every night. Doctors in Baghdad wrote casebooks. Casebooks are humility stapled to observation. That combination saves lives. The House of Wisdom also did a rude thing to poetry. It told it to wait its turn. The budget went first to books that changed reality when understood. Mathematics, astronomy, medicine, mechanics, geography. If a poem could do that, it could come in. Otherwise, it could take a number. People call that cold. I call it triage for civilization. What about theology? It existed, loudly. But the men in this shop learned to keep their fights in certain rooms and their hands busy in others. They argued in the morning and checked numbers in the afternoon. A city that can hold both in its mouth without choking is a city that eats well. Now the part that annoys romantic historians. Baghdad did not worship the past. It used it like a ladder and kept climbing. After you translate a book, you comment on it, correct it, and sometimes crush it under a better idea. You do not go back and ask the original author for permission. He is dead. The living world is not. This is how knowledge grows up. The machine had quality control. An error in a math text shows up on the first page where the units do not match. An error in a star table appears the first clear night. An error in a drug recipe appears when a patient stops breathing. The shop treated proofs and patients as feedback. It is annoying to be wrong. It is worse to be wrong politely forever. Libraries mattered, but not because people sighed over them. They mattered because a man could walk to a shelf and fetch the right page in minutes instead of months. Cataloguing was not decoration. It was oxygen. Shelves that made sense saved lives because the surgeon with blood on his hands did not have time to wander through a room of scrolls, wondering whether miscellaneous meant hope. You like funerals. Here is your satire ration. While some cities painted heroes on walls and called it security, Baghdad hired copyists and called it tomorrow. Warlords spend on horses. States that plan to last spend on shelves. The horse dies by winter. The shelf still works in spring. If you think this is unromantic, you are confusing romance with results. Students in this machine learned the rude art of asking better questions. Not what did the ancients say, but what do the numbers say? Not who is your teacher, but does your method hold on Tuesday? Apprentices copied tables until their hands hurt, and then checked the tables until their eyes watered. When they graduated, they did not get hats. They got harder work. Geography turned maps from rumors into arguments with coastlines. Merchants contributed data the way birds contribute sound at dawn, constantly, whether you wanted it or not. A ship returns and reports a current that did not match last year's guess. The map adjusts. A caravan returns and reports a waterhole that failed. The route adjusts. Maps that do not adjust are artwork. Artwork does not save caravans. Engineering started to shake itself awake. Water clocks got less moody. Lifting devices got less theatrical and more useful. A city that can lift stones without breaking backs gets taller. A city with better canals wastes less river and grows more bread. Half of civilization is how you move water without crying. Do not imagine the shop as a quiet garden. It was louder than a market, and just as fun if you like useful fights. A translator and a mathematician argue over a word that looks innocent and hides a ratio. A physician tells a philosopher to come look at a patient before writing another paragraph about essence. A star watcher walks in at noon like a ghost and slaps a table on the bench because last night the sky contradicted a famous man from a century ago, and the famous man will not be apologizing. This mess is not a flaw. It is the price of progress, paid gladly by adults who care more about truth than pride. Let us touch the money again because it decides whether your dream eats. The court used taxes and trade profits to buy books, pay stipends, and keep the ink flowing. When the river of money was high, the shelves got fat. When it ran low, some rooms went quiet. A serious state treats knowledge like grain. You store in good years to survive the thin ones. The smart treasurer understands that the house of wisdom is a granary that feeds tomorrow's tools. The enemies of this machine were the same three you keep meeting. War burns the workshop. Ideology empties it. Neglect lets dust do the rest. Baghdad held all three at bay for a while, with a mixture of luck and stubbornness. Eventually, they came like they always do, dressed up as destiny. But while the doors were open, the team built enough stairs that other cities could climb, even after Baghdad had to stop. This is not a love letter. It is a maintenance log. You want to keep a civilization awake. Hire translators, fund copyists, teach apprentices, pay critics to be annoying, buy paper in bulk, label your shelves, test your numbers against the sky in the clinic, and make it normal to admit a mistake by lunch and fix it by supper. That is not romance. That is survival with a desk lamp. Here is a simple proof that the machine worked. Europe woke up centuries later and found itself reading Arabic names for Greek ideas. Algebra did not arrive with a trumpet. It arrived with a ledger. The star names that navigators used on cold decks were spelled the way an Arab scribe wrote them down. Doctors remembered a Persian physician's way of organizing disease because it made sense at night. Knowledge traveled in the same boring way grain does: sacks, ships, hands, shelves. If you need a hero, pick a type instead of a person. Pick the translator who refused to fudge a term because close enough kills. Pick the scribe who sharpened his reed and copied clean tables while the room got loud. Pick the observer who kept waking up when nobody else would because the planet does not care about your bedtime. Pick the critic who wrote in the margin "no" with a small argument that outlived 3 empires. Those people are how the lights stay on. Let us make the idea of zero feel like a tool, not a relic. Imagine you have to add long numbers. Without zero, you leave blank spaces and hope your eye does not betray you. With zero, you mark the empties and your columns march like soldiers. Multiplying gets faster. Division becomes a thing a child can do without tears. Fractions stop being a game of poetry and become construction. The city that adopts this writes contracts that do not cheat and builds markets that do not stall. It is not just math, it is trust. Astronomers brought trigonometry like a new wrench. You want distances. You want angles. You want to point a thing at another thing and hit it or avoid it. You need sines and cosines, and you need them tabulated by someone who did not blink during the eclipse. Baghdad made the tables. Later, others used them to aim across oceans. A table is a ladder. You do not have to love ladders to admit they save ankles. Medicine learned to separate what looked good from what worked. That is harder than it sounds, and more important than it looks. A doctor who writes down the case for the stranger who will read it 10 years later has already done a piece of science. He has admitted that memory is a liar, and that a page can be a better brain than the one in his head. Baghdad had rooms full of such pages. You can practically hear the hum of competence through time. Was there censorship? Sometimes. Was there conflict between faith and inquiry? Sometimes. Did that stop the machine? Not when the shop floor was loud and the ledgers were fed. You can have arguments and still meet your deadline. Anyone who has ever built anything knows this. If your argument stops the work, it is not an argument. It is a tantrum. People like to tell a tidy story about decline. They want one villain, one moment, one dramatic fire. Real life is a leaky roof and distracted management. Wars, shifted trade. Politics fought over budgets. A flood here, a bad harvest there, a new courtier who loved verse more than tables. The machine cooled slowly. That is what machines do when they lose oil and attention. The pity is not that it ended. Everything ends. The pity is that people forgot the boring rules that made it start. We are supposed to be impressed by genius. Fine. But the House of Wisdom did something better than genius. It made normal good. Skill became routine. Care became ordinary. A sloppy page looked indecent. That is the victory that lasts. If you can make competence your culture, you can ride out a lot of nonsense before the nonsense wins. Think of the House of Wisdom as a harbor for knowledge. Ships arrive with cargo called ideas. Dock workers called translators unload them without breaking anything important. Quartermasters called librarians stack them so someone can find them in the dark. Inspectors called critics tap the crates and listen for hollow spots. Carpenters called teachers fix the broken parts. Then the cargo goes back out on other ships with new labels for new ports. If you cannot admire that because it lacks robes and incense, you deserve to run out of spice. I will give you one last image. A boy holds a page up to the window. The light shows the fibers in the paper like a tiny map of rivers. On that page are numbers that describe a curve the moon will take months from now. He traces the numbers with a finger and feels like he is touching the future. He is, in a small, mechanical way. That future will guide a captain around a reef, tell a farmer when to flood his field, and let a muezzin call prayer at a time that matches the sun, not a guess. That is dignity made practical. What does any of this matter to you and your life full of glowing screens? The same rules run your world, whether you like them or not. Translate the useful thing into a language your team understands. Copy it clean. Label it so you can find it tomorrow. Check it against reality. Pay the people who do the dull parts, especially when they are tired. Make it normal to admit an error fast. Then do it again. That is civilization. Everything else is a costume. Baghdad's House of Wisdom taught a lesson that sounds small and turns out to be the whole trick. Build a place where truth can be made boring. If truth is a constant drama, it dies every time the actors get tired. If truth is a habit, it survives fools and seasons. This is not glamorous. It is stable. Stability is the only miracle you can plan. When you hear that the place fell to time and war and all the usual killers, grieve, then do the adult thing Baghdad did at its start. Start again. Not by praying for a hero, but by hiring a clerk with clean hands, a translator with a stubborn streak, a teacher who can stand a room of restless people and keep the page moving, and a manager who loves labels more than praise. That is how you build a house of wisdom without pretending you are special. You want a moral? It fits on a shelf. Keep the lights on for people who make pages other people can trust. Pay for paper. Triple check the tables. Teach the next pair of hands to love clarity. Make the useful thing easy to find. Do not worship the past, use it. Do not wait for perfection. Publish improvement. When the river brings a new idea, do not drown it in ceremonies. Dry it, copy it, argue with it, and put it to work by Tuesday. The House of Wisdom was not a miracle. It was a schedule. Schedules feel small until you try to live without one. Then the world turns to noise, and you realize that a calendar is a form of mercy. Baghdad gave the future calendars for thinking. That is more than most capitals ever manage. Here is the quiet ending. Somewhere in the city, long after the call to prayer, a lamp burns above a desk. A translator leans over a page, mutters, scratches out a word, writes a better one, and sits back. He is not famous. He is not a statue. He is a hinge. The door of knowledge swings on him and men like him. It squeaks sometimes. He adds oil. The door stays useful. Tomorrow, someone you will never meet walks through it carrying a tool that did not exist yesterday. That is the win. It always was. Remember the rule: useful knowledge must be made boring on purpose, checked against reality, and copied clean, so it can survive fools and time.